next speaker, Christian Palacios, Haugestad. What is a great name.
Yeah, thank you very much, and thank you for being here. Yeah, my name is Christian Palacios Haugestad, and forgive my mixed accent, as I'm half Latin American, half Scandinavian. So that explains it. So my presentation today is going to be from a bit of a different perspective from what we've heard so far. So brace with me. I'm going to talk to you about my ongoing research project about visualizing ecological distress, in which I'm exploring discursive constructions of eco-anxiety on social media. So I may not have mentioned it, but I work as a PhD fellow at the University of Oslo, and I'm very thankful for the organization of this conference, as it's been really inspiring, and I really appreciate the interdisciplinarity of this space, and I'm looking forward to hear your comments on my work. So before I begin, a little shout out to my supervisors, Erik and Ole Jakob, and my colleague Marit, who has been collaborating in this bigger project, mapping discourses on ecological distress online. They have been instrumental in developing some of the ideas that I will be presenting here today. So briefly, I will introduce you to some of the psychological research regarding ecological emotions. We've already discussed a bit about climate anxiety and ecological grief during this conference, with some great expositions so far. This is going to be maybe a bit of a different perspective, looking at it from critical theory and how categories of distress are socially constructed and what the implications of that might be, in order to pave the way for visual discourse analysis of how these ecological distresses and climate anxieties are being constructed online. And then I'm going to show you a bit of the preliminary results and discuss my work with you. So within psychology and adjacent fields, we have a lot of awareness and interest in this ecological emotions and the affective dimensions of our entanglement with the ecological crisis. So these are often called eco-emotions, and these are only some of the ways in which we are trying to put language into these sort of felt experiences. So nostalgia, climate grief, eco-anxiety, ecological affect, and there's many other ways of portraying this in the academic discourse. And focusing on the more negative side of this, ecological distress can be defined as any forms of emotional, psychological, or existential kind of distress related to present or anticipated climatic changes. And the context for my study is, of course, the recent interest in this form of digitalization of ecological activism, especially after COVID, but way before that as well, which is seen how this forms of activism has taken shape in this digital spheres as well, alongside what is happening in the real world, and whatever that might be. But in my research project, I try to acknowledge how these social media spheres act as a really active space for meaning making, and in many ways afford this mobilization of affected publics. It's a space where a lot of feelings transpire and mobilize a sense of collective agency around, or can be a sense of collective agency online. So taking a critical psychological perspective, I acknowledge that any kind of distress and way to portray it and ways to describe it in language are socially constructed, and this this is something that is emerging within specific cultural contexts, socio-historical, economic, and cultural, and institutional, of course, also contexts, which give these ways of putting, these ways of categorizing gives them a sense of legitimacy and is in constant change. So some usual suspects within these critical psychological perspectives are, of course, medicalization and pathologization, whether calling ecological distress for eco-anxiety within this framework of medicalized perspective makes it a thing to be treated with medicine or therapy, in a sense. Another question is whether putting it in these words might be furthering the individualization of this responsibility, so putting responsibility for the climate crisis into the individual again. And also the question of whether talking about ecological emotions might lead to a sense of normativizing felt emotions. So defining which kind of emotions are ought to be felt or right or wrong to be felt, which can be a sense of lead to, for example, affective dilemmas within the individual, for example, feeling guilty about feeling happy about the Norwegian summers getting hotter, which may arise in dilemmas in the individual, but also a public debate on what is right to feel in a specific situation. So my research question is, how are eco-anxieties made sense of and performed on Instagram? And this is something that I'm still developing at the moment. I'm also engaging with the data and developing my aim throughout. But what I've done so far is I've taken inspiration from the digital anthropologists and engaged in sort of deep scrolling in Instagram as a social media platform. This project is a part of a bigger project where we've been looking at this on Instagram, TikTok, and also other social media. But we really wanted to kind of jump into this scene and try to strive for a thick description of what is happening in there. So that entailed the observation of how people are discussing these eco-emotions on Instagram, usually following these hashtags, which are organizing tools that gather how people are talking and representing these on the social media. So I did this quite embodied and experientially through how you would engage with Instagram on your daily practice. So on the metro, on my work after the lunch dip, for example, and trying to document systematically what I felt when I saw that kind of content and what I kind of did with it. Were there some posts that invited me to share them with my friends, for example, and try to really take note of what the content is trying to do with the user. So in a sense, the analysis is an analysis of the content itself, but I try to incorporate also what it made me feel, in a sense. Doing this broad exploration, I also decided to gather some specific data and collect them and their associated comments and look at through the profiles and really delve into some specific exemplaries of how eco-anxieties are being represented online. And being a psychologist, I try to kind of take a step aside and let myself be inspired by other ways of looking at this data. So I'm drawing on the visual turn in qualitative psychological research, which acknowledge that discourse is highly multimodal. It has different spheres of meaning, and I use this critical discourse analysis framework, which has been recently developed in order to examine and put the visual in the center stage of the analysis. So inspired by McCullough and Lester and Saki and Pettersson, I looked at the content in 3 stages. So first looking at the content, the form, and then the function of what the images are doing, in a sense. So I'll show you briefly some of the results and the things I've so far thought were quite interesting. So to begin with, climate anxiety is in many ways represented as something quite individual. So it's often feminine characters being portrayed, and one of the functions that I've looked at so far is how climate anxiety is being represented in a way that kind of legitimizes this felt emotion. So many of the posts are using this text overlaid in quite aesthetic images and using expert voices in order to kind of say, EcoAnxiety, this is a real thing. So in many ways, they are kind of reifying, using this psychologists say, research shows, and kind of making it a thing, a legitimate response to climate change. What is maybe interesting in this sense is that when news outlet users are posting this kind of content, comments in responses are often quite critical and saying things like, yes, see what you're doing when you're communicating climate change in the way you're doing. So it's quite interesting in this sense. Within this kind of broader theme, we see that coping is kind of portrayed as a sense of cultural imperative. So we see the use of this professionalized, highly curated content in aesthetic pastel colors that present ecological distress within this kind of inspirational quote format, which is kind of enabling visibility, credibility, and also this shareability, which invites the user to share this with like-minded friends or other followers. So I try to analyze this within this new awareness of the social functions of this sort of text on Instagram and what they're trying to do. And in this sense, I argue that the way these Instagram users are presenting climate anxiety and eco-anxiety, it's in many ways reproducing the sense of individual responsibility for coping and a sense of affect management that the individual is itself responsible for its own affect regulation. Another big broad theme is how climate and eco-anxiety is represented through this environmentalist aesthetic. And it's very often drawing on a sense of femininized aesthetic, which my argument is that it reproduces a sense of consumer empowerment through the use of often green pictures, women posing in nature. Often the description is telling about how they came up with this specific fashion item and how it's upcycled, recycled, and ethical, and often what they seem to be doing is reproducing a sense of post-feminist ideals where the ideals of feminism have largely been acquired, and what is important is consumer empowerment and aesthetics in the sense. So probably more hopeful result that I want to highlight is how another genre of posts being created on Instagram are in many ways challenging this sense of toxic positivity where you have to take care of yourself and just get through it and power individually, where meme creators and often environmentalist organizations and eco-influencers are kind of latching onto this concept of eco-anxiety, using humor and ironic distance in order to kind of shake up this individualization of responsibility. So I want to zoom into one of these memes. Here we have a maybe well-known meme where this person is dressing up as a clown and starting off with, I'll go out to therapy to figure out my trauma, and eventually they end up in getting over it and feeling safe in a pre-apocalyptic world. So in many ways, these popular mimetic references are adding layers of meaning and using humor actively in order to resist this therapeutic individualizing discourses. So again, the memes and these constructions are crafted in a very shareable way, using irony. And one thing that they might be doing is building this eco-identity as something that can be shared and can reinforce this community feeling of resisting this individual kind of eco-anxiety in a sense. So as a way of finalizing discussion, I argue that psychocultural conceptualizations such as eco-anxiety and the like live their own life in social media. So in a way, they offer certain subjectivities above others. So some ways of understanding ourselves are being made more available than others. And in my analysis, I see that some of these representations of eco-anxiety reproduce sort of individualized neoliberal imperatives, such as the imperative of affective self-regulation and self-management, and also this post-feminism that I argue for. But also, on the flip side, these communities online also seem to be resisting these individualizing conceptualizations through humor, irony, and the like. So being affected by climate change is actively negotiated and resisted in the digital spheres. Thank you very much for your attention.